Good evening, everybody, and thank you very, very much for joining us for our Militarism and Gun Violence Connecting the Dots webinar. Tonight, we have two very, very special guests. We have Pat Elder and we have Kathy Kelly. Pat Elder will be talking to us first, and I want to give you some background about what we're talking about. On February 14th this year, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz entered the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, with a military-style rifle, killing 17 students and severely injuring numerous others. What we have been shocked to learn is that Nicholas Cruz was taught to shoot at Stoneman Douglas High School through the Junior Reserve Officer Training Program and the Civilian Marksmanship Program. That program received $10,000 in funding from the NRA. Thousands of children as young as 13 years old are targeted and taught to shoot in order to eventually end up being recruited into one of the three branches of the military. As activists and fighters for justice and peace, understanding that our schools have become recruiting and training grounds for the military-industrial complex while we as a society struggle daily with the twin realities of gun violence and endless war, is a reality we must not turn away from, especially when that gun violence is turned on our children, as in the case of the Parkland killings. While this issue may be new to us, tonight's speaker, Pat Elder, has been working to expose and counter military recruiting in our schools for many years. A longtime peace activist and member of Veterans for Peace, Pat Elder is the author of Military Recruiting in the United States and director of the National Coalition to Protect Student Privacy, an organization working to counter militarization of our schools. Pat has crafted bills and helped pass legislation to curtail military recruiters from accessing student data, and he has helped convince more than 1,000 schools to protect student data. He worked to lead the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child to call on the Obama administration to adhere to the rights of the child in armed conflict as it relates to military recruiting. Welcome, Pat, and I am going to turn the screen over to you.
Well, thank you, Andrea. I trust everyone can see me.
Yes.
And I will share my screen and see if I can pull up a PowerPoint presentation here.
Very good.
Okay, here we go. Can you all see that okay?
Yes, we see it.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. I mean, I have trepidation about only a few things, and this certainly is one. I'm never too trustful. But I appreciate the opportunity, folks. When we counter military recruitment in the public schools, we typically look at 4 avenues of resistance. The first avenue has to do with just the access that military recruiters enjoy. Now, the Recruiter's Handbook, published by the United States Military Entrance Processing Command, calls for school ownership. And that's really what they're trying to do. You know, when some schools in Florida have 500 children in the JROTC program, when schools in Iowa have half a dozen military recruiters chilling in the hallways and talking to kids in the parking lot and having lunch with children, as they do across the country, that's what we're seeing. When they flip the coin at halftime, when they coach the boys basketball team, That's what we're talking about, school ownership. We are witnessing a frightening period in American history, and we're seeing it through the militarization of our schools. Our children are tender. They're loving young creatures. We need to nurture them, not militarize them. This is all about children. So we have to be cognizant of that. And so we have to understand that federal law calls for military recruiters to have the same access that college recruiters have. The thing is, college recruiters usually meet with kids one-on-one in the guidance office. Military recruiters eat lunch with kids, hang out after school, join the JROTC program, coach teams. So that's one angle. You need to talk to your principal and say, whoa, it says same access in federal law. Why are these guys chilling with kids in the parking lot? The next avenue of resistance has to do with military testing. And quite quickly, the military gives its enlistment test. That's the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, ASVAB, to more than 700,000 kids now in 13,000 schools. It is growing. It continues to grow. We actually have more than 1,000 schools that now require children to take the test. They're mostly minority schools and schools made up predominantly of children living under the poverty line, so it really doesn't get a whole lot of attention. The nicer schools in wealthier areas often don't even administer the ASVAB test. Counselors like to have the test because they claim that it helps children figure out what they want to do when they get older. The military uses the test because it provides information on the cognitive abilities. See, they already know Johnny drives a pickup truck, fly fishes. They know his girlfriend doesn't want him to join. Man, they got all the data in the world from Facebook and Instagram. They know what's going on. What they don't know is how smart the boy is. They don't know if he can factor polynomials. And they find that out through the ASVAB test. It's extremely important. And there's a myth out there that the military only wants the dumb ones. They'll take smart ones. Oh yeah, and so there's a premium on the smart ones. And so they test them in mass. In Maryland, I wrote a law that I managed to get passed with the help of of Representative Jamie Raskin, who's in Congress now. And we basically say, hey, military, you want to test kids in Maryland? Back off. You got to get parental permission. Another aspect of militarism has to do with the opt-out form, and this is another avenue of resistance. Federal law passed by the Bush administration in 2001 basically says that if a recruiter requests the names, addresses, and phone numbers of kids in a high school, they're entitled to that information. But the school is supposed to tell parents they have the right to opt out, to remove those kids' names from lists going to recruiters. Most schools don't do so. Most schools are oblivious, and so most parents are oblivious. The law is weak. In Maryland, we passed another law, and it didn't just happen in a month or two. It happened over the course of some years. But the law basically puts the opt-out language on the emergency contact form. So up at the top right-hand corner of the only form that parents have to fill out every year, it says, do you want your child's information released to military recruiters, yes or no? So I've covered ASVAB, I've covered the opt-out, and I've covered the access military recruiters enjoy. Now I'm going to talk about the JROTC program. And real quickly, the JROTC program, it operates in nearly 3,000 schools now across the country. It is taught mostly by non-degreed, non-licensed high school graduates. They teach credited courses. Many schools now give AP credit for JROTC programs that are being taught by non-licensed, non-educated people. Many states, like Florida, for instance, will allow you to take JROTC and substitute that for several academic courses. So throughout the United States today, we are substituting reactionary texts taught by non degreed individuals, and they substitute that for civics and government, physical education, and the JROTC program. And by the way, what do they teach? Well, to give you an idea, the unit on American government is called You the People. The most important thing is obedience, obeying the chain of command. These guys aren't advocates of Jeffersonian democracy. They don't want to nurture a thinking mind, and they do not. And so they teach children that those pesky North Vietnamese fired on our battleship in the Gulf of what was the name of that Gulf, you guys remember, in Vietnam? What was the name of it? Tonkin, the Gulf of Tonkin. Yeah, thanks. And so, gosh, we had to fight that. Well, we had to kill, we had to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those darn Japanese, boy, they were going to kill 1 million Americans. And so that's the rule. Military might is right. That's what they're teaching 550,000 children. So I want to take you through this PowerPoint. This, for me, represents the lowest lying fruit. Kids are not just shooting lethal firearms, but they're poisoning themselves while doing so. These guns are, they're pellet guns. And every time a pellet comes out of the gun, a little bit of lead goes into the air and falls on the floor. The pellet comes out at 600 feet per second, hits the target, and all kinds of minute particle comes into the air, and it comes all on the floor and all throughout the target. The ventilation systems in high schools are not set up. These kids are in the cafeteria, for God's sakes. They're in the gyms. So let me take you through this PowerPoint. Also, you can see this information. I have a new 25-page report on linking lead contamination with pellet gun shooting through the JROTC program. It's on studentprivacy.org. Click on that website and you'll see the research. Luckily and fortunately, we have an assemblywoman in New York State, Linda Rosenthal, who just introduced legislation calling for banning the practice of shooting in high schools. So you've seen this slide, and I already brought you through this Junior Reserve Training Corps, 3,400 high schools. It's actually a little higher now. It's kind of interesting that 65% of them are in the old Confederacy. It's amazing. They're substituting core curriculum courses. They're taught by military retirees with no college, reactionary brand of U.S. history. And sometimes kids have to take the program. We're increasingly seeing that. Now, according to data provided by the Civilian Marksmanship Program, 1,871 military shooting programs in the country. You can click on the link on our website, and you can find the list of all the high schools that have these programs in your state. The Civilian Marksmanship Program was set up in 1903 by Congress. They were worried, after the Spanish-American War that a lot of urban Americans didn't know how to shoot straight, and they figured there would be many wars to come, so they wanted to teach children how to shoot. So the focus of the Civilian Marksmanship Program since 1903 has been to arm and teach children to shoot. The second purpose of the Civilian Marksmanship Program is to sell at a profit the retired weaponry used by the Army. And so we're the only country on earth that actually does not destroy its retired weaponry and instead recycles it at a profit to the citizens. The Trump administration just opened the doors to the sale of 100,000 automatic pistols. This is a new bend. Until now, it was only rifles, but now the CMP is selling pistols. They have so much money. They have more than $170 million in annuities and stocks. These kids are actually in Nick Cruz's high school. It's funny. I get a lot of angry emails. I try my best to return them with love. It's hard to do, but boy, when this went up, I don't know how many I got, maybe 50, where they were like, "You son of a, well, you're making it up." So so on February 14th, I went to the page, their web page, pulled this up, and the next day they took it down, but I got it. And so I've since been able to find other pictures of their cafeteria and, same floor, the same columns. I've been able to prove it. But 300 kids. We've got 300 kids in their JROTC program in one school. There's several states that don't have 300 kids in their JROTC programs. The book, the gun that Ralphie shot in Christmas Story, his Red Ryder, shot at 350 feet per second. This shoots at 600 feet per second. It shoots a .177 caliber lead pellet, similar to a .22 caliber bullet, like the one that hit President Reagan. That was going at probably between 800 and 900 feet per second. Walmart here in Lexington Park sells air guns that shoot at 1,600 feet per second, and children are allowed to buy them. There are no federal laws. There are no state laws in half of the states. 1,600 feet per second. They advertise the fact that they can kill wild boars. So it's okay for the children. That's what we're doing. We're allowing children to purchase weapons that can kill wild boars, not to mention humans. Dozens of humans every year are killed with these soft guns, the NRA likes to call them. Air guns, they like to call them. They shoot lead pellets. There's no safe level of lead. The cafeterias are filled with lead. Now, there are all kinds of studies linking air gun use to inboard lead particulate matter. But the military and the civilian marksmanship program relies on the work of HET, this guy's Ranasovich, who was cited for negligence in Colorado. And they use his work to say that the lead doesn't become airborne. When we have science from different nations and the United States that says, oh, yes, it does. And so thousands of children are becoming poisoned. So the CDC says, hey, 0, okay? They say any bit of lead can hurt, okay? But now they say anything over 5 milligrams per deciliter that these children suffer from lead poisoning. So keep that in your head, 5 milligrams, okay? Okay, now here's some science, folks. I know science is not in vogue, okay? But let's just look at this for a second. So studies of shooters who fired only air guns. I'm not talking about boom, powdered guns, just the air guns. Blood lead levels of 1.8 to 12.7 micrograms per deciliter, okay? When they say 5 micrograms means that you are poisoned. Now, research on the health effects of blood lead levels on pregnancy, as low as 2. You want to know why we have so much autism, ADD, ADHD? I'm telling you, historians seem to think that my God, Rome fell largely because of lead-encrusted plumbing. It's just frightening. So you have these children, these young girls too, that are potentially poisoning their children in the high schools. I'll get to that later. A Swedish study, the air in an indoor firing range, exclusively for air guns, 1.8 to 7.2 micrograms per cubic meter. And then the state of California says, hey, we're going to mark it at 0.5 to 2.1 micrograms per liter so that we can keep the blood levels at the range of 5 to 10, which exceed what the CDC says. It's horrendous. I've been beating my head against the world for 10 years. It takes a boy like Nick Cruz to go kill 17 people to get a little exposure. Now, this is an amazing video. I'm going to flip it on. There may be an ad for about 15 or 20 seconds ahead of time, but we're going to go up to 305. Remember, the CMP says that lead does not become airborne. Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Can you all see that okay?
No. No.
You can't see this?
We can see the slide. We're not seeing it.
You can't see this.
Nope, not the video. Not the video.
How about that?
If you want to show us, you're going to need to copy the link into a web browser. You're sharing your screen. We'll see it then.
Okay.
Yep. Just go to your web browser.
Okie dokie. How do I get out of here? I was doing so well. Yeah. Let me get out of YouTube then, huh?
Just minimize PowerPoint.
Okay, there we go. Can you see that okay now?
No,
how do I get?
I didn't really minimize.
Okay, but I'm back on now, right?
Yeah.
Now, how do I get this link to you all?
Right mouse click it.
Right?
Right mouse click it and stick it in the chat.
Oh,
or
okay.
send it to me and I'll send it to people later.
Oh, really? So we can't see it right now? Where is chat?
Down at the bottom of the screen. It'll say chat.
It's okay. It's okay. Let's move forward. Look, that screen basically showed a slow motion of a puff of smoke coming out of the barrel that it contains lead particulate matter, and it blows toward the child. That's what I wanted to show you. Here, can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, here's a still of a pellet coming out. Those are little lead pieces there. That is deadly. These are in the cafeterias. Now, now this is another YouTube. Should I try it? Should I try this?
You can.
Can you see that?
No, YouTube's PowerPoint really don't work. When you're running a Zoom.
Okay. Well, this is a 40-second video that, I just opened some Crossman pellets. I put them on a white piece of paper, and then I have the pellets roll off, and what is left is black powder. And so when the kids play with these pellets, as you saw that child, they get the lead residue caked on their fingers. And then you go like that. And you can get to 5 to 10 microliters in a heartbeat. It's that quick. So, Neosh, I can hear somebody speaking, guys. So the military says kids just need to wash their hands. But the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health says that's not enough. Now, here's the civilian marksmanship program. Somebody may want to mute their mic.
They're all muted. They're all muted.
Okay. Oh, well, maybe it's me. Okay. Can you all hear that? Okay. So the civilian marksmanship publishes this guide to lead management. And the work was performed, as I alluded to earlier, by Health and Environmental Technology, LLC, to dispel the science that air guns create airborne lead particulate matter. This is the guide. This is what I want America to know exists, because it is filled with faulty science. Here is the sole employee of HET. He was cited for gross technical incompetence in technical compliance. He's the one who wrote that you don't need special ventilation systems, that lead does not become airborne. Hang on just a second, guys. Okay. Now, this is amazing. I'll tell you a quick story. The Civilian Marksmanship Program publishes guidelines for lead management. And they say that if you go downrange, you should go on the far right side that is cleaned, and that students shouldn't do that. It should be the range cleaner, and that the range cleaner should be using, wraps on their feet. Okay. But we have video that shows these children just leaving their shooting and walking to the target. So they've got all of these piles of lead on their feet, and they're tracking them through their school in Flint, Michigan. So I called the high school principal, who told me to talk to the health department, and I called the health department. And the health department told me to call the EPA. And so I called the EPA, and the EPA told me to call the military. And then I called the military, and they told me to go to hell, basically. Not in so many words. But the EPA refused to examine it because they said that it wasn't their responsibility. Okay, we're getting out of here. Now, this is an amazing video because it shows children in inner city Rochester, New York, and they are filled with lead, and you can see the lead. You just have to see the video, but they're in the boiler room, and it's filthy. And these cadets in, Freeport, Illinois, the video just shows them finishing their firing and then walking to the target to take their targets out, again, in contravention of the regulations that have been set up. See, the Civilian Marksmanship Program has $160 million in assets, but they only spend $400,000 a year on cleaning and maintenance and supervision. And so they put these incredibly stringent regulations together regarding lead management to cover themselves, but then they don't really enforce them. That's the problem in a nutshell. And so I have a meeting with Jamie Raskin on Thursday, and I have a meeting with Maryland officials also on Thursday, calling for at least some sort of congressional study. Hopefully we can get that accomplished. These kids, for instance, are at a commercial firing range in Vancouver, Washington, and 20 children were sickened, very sickened, with very high blood lead levels. And kids from JROTC and 4-H and gosh, the Boy Scouts shoot there. And so we have hundreds of firing ranges across the country where children as young as 8 are coming into contact with deadly lead particulates. These places are filthy, and you just have to see the data on the lead contamination on our website. JROTC kids also practice, and they have shoots at armories. And so the Oregonian newspaper published a study where they were able to access 424 armories. There are another 1,500 they were not able to access. None in the state of New York have reports, for instance. None in the state of Maryland have reports, but in some states they were allowed to report, and 90% of the places they visited had deadly lead particulates. Like Frederickstown, Missouri Armory had 883 micrograms of lead per foot. That's 20 times more. I mean, they had sleepovers there. So, children as young as 8 are sleeping over in these dreadful conditions. That's all I have. I just think that, we have to go after the lowest lying fruit. And I think that lead contamination is. But I will beg your readers, right, your listeners, your watchers right now, to go to studentprivacy.org, click on the link that says 25 pages, and basically I've taken scientific journal information and just website information and put it into a concise brief of 25 pages that clearly show the linkage between sickened children and the JROTC program. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Oh, I've got. No. So I'm not going to much. I do want to. Pat, go ahead and stop sharing your screen. It's at the top center. There'll be a red stop sharing. At the top center, there'll be a red stop sharing. Perfect.
Yay me.
Perfect. Great. All right. I am going to introduce our next guest. And our next guest is, got rid of that. Our next guest is Kathy Kelly. Kathy, we want to talk about the dots between militarism and gun violence. So it really makes sense that we welcome someone who has spent a good deal of her adult life working as a peace activist, and that's Kathy Kelly. Kathy is co-founder for Voices for Creative Nonviolence, an organization that works to end U.S. military and economic warfare. Kathy has a long history of nonviolent resistance to U.S. military expansion, from deliberately defying U.S. sanctions to deliver necessary medicines to the child victims of shock and awe, to her open opposition of Israeli apartheid in Gaza, to her nonviolent arrest and subsequent jail sentence for crossing over at the gates of Fort Benning's School of the Americas. Kathy, welcome.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and thank you also to Harriet and to Pat and to all of the people who've joined us on this call. Pat, it's so troubling, to think about the ways in which children are victims of, in a sense, chemical warfare in Flint, Michigan, because of the lead in the pipes, and then to realize that the lead discharge on the floors of their cafeteria, of their can also be poisoning them. And Pat, your research has been so very, very important. I was a high school teacher for about 14 years before I started heading over to various war zones. And, you know, I know this time of year, a lot of high school students are thinking, okay, get us out of here. You know, it's time to be done with the school year. But I can say that I've never found any place, any institution that has quite the level of, well, humor, the style of humor, and the very typical way that students have in high school of looking out for one another that I've reliably found in high schools. So it saddens me deeply to think about high schoolers being trained not to experience more curiosity and more empathy and more enjoyment of plenty of diversity, but rather being trained to see certain people as just pop-up targets, as so other and so non-human that it would make sense to just pop a bullet repeatedly and knock down the targets. Well, I hope you'll indulge me in going back into a history that is actually precedes the birth of some of our listeners who may themselves be in high school. Andrea, Pat, Harriet, I think you'll remember this. In 1995, it was April of 1995, and a young veteran of the war in Iraq, Timothy McVeigh, drove a truck that was filled with explosives, and he drove it into the Murrah Federal Building, and he exploded it. And that cost the lives of 169 people. 680 people were badly injured. So people were wondering, you know, who is Timothy McVeigh? Why did he do this? Well, when Timothy McVeigh was going through marksmanship training, he was just a stunning marksman. He could hit the target, 1,000 targets in a row unerringly. And so when he went over to Iraq, he wrote to his Aunt Edna, and he said, you know, killing Iraqis was real hard at first. And he wondered, you know, why are we killing people whose hands are up in the air, who are trying to say we surrender? But then he said, after a while, killing Iraqis got easier. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, who taught, who trained Timothy McVeigh to become someone who could murder hundreds of people? And this kind of training focused on younger people is proven to have even more effect, that in a younger person, the conscience is not so formed. And so we are obviously training young people to tolerate the idea of killing others whom they don't know. They have no real fear or enmity. It's just a target. And so I'd like to tell a story from a fairly recent trip that I had made to Afghanistan. And prior to my trip, a young student, he was a student pharmacist named Khalid Ahmed, had gone to work in the Kunduz province at a very, very dangerous place, a hospital in a war zone. And his mother had begged him the next day, Khalid, my son, don't go. It's too dangerous. But he said, Mom, last week we treated 359 patients and 50 of them were children, and there's no one to replace me. I really must go to work and help to bring medicines to people who've been injured in the fighting. This was the Taliban and the Afghan government fighting, and the United States was involved as well. And so Khalid Ahmed did his shift, and then he and the chief pharmacist went down in the basement to catch up on sleep. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, they were awakened by a huge explosion. And they ran up the stairs, and they saw that the hospital was on fire, the intensive care unit and the emergency room on fire, and patients whom they had just treated were burning in their own beds. It was a gruesome nightmare. And they ran to find the security, and security said, well, this is an air attack. And the only group that can be making this kind of an attack are the Americans. And then the security people said, quick, pull out your cell phones and take them apart, because the Americans have a way to track people through their cell phones. And so the chief pharmacist and Khalid did this, and they could see that Bofor cannons and Gatling guns from a C-135 transport had returned after the first wave of bombing and were hitting the hospital, the emergency room, and the ICU specifically. And the more fires were starting, more parts of the building were collapsing into rubble. And so the security people said, look, all we can do is to tell you to run. And so the chief pharmacist ran first, and the security people said, just go for the front entrance. And he ran as fast as he could, and he was outside the entrance. And they said to Khalid, okay, man, run. And so Khalid ran as fast as he could. His heart was pounding. He had one foot outside the hospital entrance, and he took shrapnel in his back, and he fell to the ground. And he started to bleed so profusely that, rolling himself into a ditch near the entrance, he felt sure he would lose consciousness soon and die. And in Afghan tradition, if you believe you face your death, and if you can, you talk with your father and you tell him you're sorry for anything you might have ever done to hurt him or hurt the family. But you see, Khalid had already taken apart his cell phone. And so he, with the one arm that was still working, the other was paralyzed, he reached into his backpack. He got the cell phone out. He managed to get the battery back in. He reached his mother and he begged her to put his father on the phone. Of course, the mother was frantic. My son, where are you? The father got on the phone, and while Khalid was still conscious, he said, my son, take off your vest and put it under you. It might stop some of the bleeding. And tell me exactly where you are. And mercifully, the father figured out exactly where he was, called relatives who lived nearby. They sped to the hospital. They picked up Khalid's broken body, and they managed to take him the 5-hour ride that was required to go to a hospital in the capital in Kabul run by Italians. And the Italian doctors were able to save his life. Well, I have O negative blood. And so at that hospital, they're always glad to see me because my blood can be used for different blood types. And so I was over donating blood, and I asked the hospital administrators, I was there with several of my young Afghan friends, is there anybody still here who was injured in the bombing of the hospital in Kunduz? And the Italian doctors were very excited. They said, oh, yes, this boy, he is so lonely. Please, you and your friends, go visit with him. And so my friends who could speak his language got that story that I just told you. And then he was looking at me, who's this woman? And when my friends told him that I was from the United States, Khalid seemed very troubled. He said, 42 people were killed that day, and 12 of them were my colleagues, and 3 of them were medical doctors. And then he asked me a very important question. He asked me, why would you people want to do this to us? We were only trying to help people. Why would your people want to do this to us? We were only trying to help people. And so I wonder, what would we wish for our young people? To be pharmacists like Khalid Ahmed, who would risk his own life in order to be alongside people who need healing, who need anesthetics, who need some ways to reduce the pain or to alleviate the suffering, or to be trained as people that are snipers or marksmen or bombers, or people whose job is to be on menacing huge air transports outfitted with Beaufort cannons and Gatling guns that would for an hour and a half attack the emergency room and the intensive care unit of a hospital. And I'd like to say that this is unusual, but of course when the United States gives the green light for attacking hospitals, then other countries start to attack hospitals, as Saudi Arabia did, attacking a hospital in Yemen. And so I think that question, how can we learn to live together without killing one another, is one that's so essential in the high schools while people are still young and their consciences are being formed. But if we're teaching young people to kill one another, then it becomes like a huge cognitive dissonance. How are the young people going to do both? Try to learn an answer to that question ethically, philosophically, morally, practically. And then at the same time, be encouraged by people chilling with them in the parking lot or sharing their lunches in the cafeteria or teaching them certain courses or coaching them, military people who are not going to ask that question in an earnest way. And I think also, we need to recognize the realities of proliferation. the drones, the unarmed aerial vehicles that the United States is selling to other countries all over the world, will spawn technologies such that, this can come back to harm people in the United States. And so often I think we are underserved by our own media. They don't educate us about the wars that are going on abroad and the very grave consequences of those wars. And so I also think about what it means to kind of stalk your prey and to learn how basically to be a sniper, and how you almost have to stop believing in that person as another human being equal to yourself and with the same blood that flows through his or her body. My young friends in Afghanistan, I think, do surveillance also, but you know what they do? They go up the mountainside on sometimes very, very cold and icy days, and there's not really a path. And they go up the mountainside to visit the widows who get pushed up the mountain because there's no water easily available up there. And they do their surveillance by filling out surveys. And their surveys ask, how many times a week does your family eat beans? They know the family never eats meat. And what's your access to water? And is that water poisonous? And who earns an income for your family? And how old is that person? And if the person is 12 years of age or younger, then that survey goes to the top. Those surveys, the answers to these surveys that they had collected. And they try to decide, it's not easy, but they try to decide which youngsters will be invited to be part of a street kids school. And then if they come to the school regularly, they receive rations of beans and cooking oil and rice once a month for their families. And which women will be invited to earn a living wage by sewing big, heavy blankets, and then those blankets are given away for free. And this is good training. This is good surveillance practice. This is a way to, really believe that blood never washes away blood, that extending the hand of friendship is the way to create security. And I know there are young people all across the United States who believe in this and who practice it. But while we pour the billions and the trillions for ways of beefing up the United States military, we just won't have the resources to give our young people what they need in terms of language and social work skills and communication skills to be able to live, to share habitation in this world in a secure and a safe way for the future. So it's really good that we have this time together, and I'll look forward to anybody's questions or objections or criticisms, and certainly hope that I didn't take attention away from Pat's very vital information. So thank you, Andrea, for facilitating us, and let's have some interaction with our listeners.
Thank you so very much, Kathy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Pat to restart his video, and I'm going to take questions from our audience. So, Chuck, go ahead. Your mic is open. Tell the speakers who the question's directed to. Let me try that again. There you go, Chuck. Your mic's open. Chuck, do you have a question? Chuck, if your mic's not working, you can go ahead and type a question in the chat room and I will see it. Oh, I see it in Q&A. All right, yes, Chuck, I can't hear you. You can type your question right here in Q&A. And I'm going to say that for anybody else. You can type your question right here in Q&A. I'm opening the mics, but if we can't hear you, I can see your question in Q&A. I'm going to go down the list. Mara, do you have a question? Hang on, Mara. I am opening your mic right now.
No, I don't at this time. Oh, my phone just died.
We still hear you, Mara. That's fine.
Terrific.
All right, thanks. Well, her mic works and she doesn't have a question. It's kind of a first time for you, Mara.
Well, I can jump in if you like.
Go ahead, Pat. Or whoever.
Well, I love Kathy Kelly. You know, I don't no, I work on factual stuff to keep me from going insane, and you know, I just really get inspired by listening to Kathy and others like her. I'm not really of that ilk. I mean, I suppose I am in a sense, but it's kind of like amperage and voltage in that are required to bring power to a light bulb. You know, you got the volts and maybe I'm the volts. You know, I'm there to light it up. But she's the amps, man. She's the power, and she lights me up. And so you know, it's that kind of moral power. You know, I mean, I'm just in awe. Thank you, Kathy. You know, I love it.
And Kathy, you really inspired me. This is one of the reasons why years and years ago, actually decades ago, I really got involved with the peace movement. So that really took me back, and that was very, very, very inspiring. It is right at, oh, go ahead, Kathy, yes.
Well, just to say, maybe 2 years ago, actually, I was in Colorado, and a fellow said, he called a press conference, and he said he was going to give up his gun. And what he did was, in front of the press on a cold, cold winter day, he pulled out his gun and he sawed it in half. And then it was a big gun, you know, a rifle. And then his son fashioned it into a matlock as a garden tool. And since that time, this duo have volunteered to saw anybody's gun. And so, you know, they beg people, bring us your guns. And they put them on an anvil, and they bring out the saw and blowtorch, and they fashion them into garden tools. And they call it raw tools, you know, war spelled backwards. But I want to encourage everybody. I mean, I don't have a gun to saw in half, but if you happen to know somebody who wants to get rid of their gun, this would be a worthwhile way to do it.
Excellent. The swords into plowshares idea.
Exactly, yeah. I think we have a question from Harriet.
Harriet,
Yep.
your mic's
Can you
open.
hear me?
Yes, your mic's open.
Okay, thank you. Yep, thanks. Pat, I live in a conservative district and in Florida, and I would like to work on this issue. And I'm sure there are other people just like me. So what do you recommend people in conservative districts do to bring attention to this issue?
Well, I suppose you're talking about the Jay Rotzi issue. You know, there's just two levels here. One level is, you know, the absolute abomination of teaching a 13-year-old how to shoot a lethal weapon as a, you know, an instrument of public policy. This is the state teaching 13-year-olds to kill. Okay, that's an abomination. It's horrendous. I think the lead is the way to go. And I would strongly encourage you, Harriet, to, you know, read through the 25-page report. You know, sometimes there's a little bit of pain, but read through it and arm yourself with what you think is going to be most compelling. but you are in arguably the most horrific state as far as militarism is concerned. Boca Ciega High School, for instance, has 500 children in their JROTC program, and they allow the children, against Army regulations, against all federal regulations, against OSHA regulations, and against regulations put out by the Civilian Marksmanship Program and USA Shooting and the NRA. They allow children to clean up the range after shooting. So all of the lead, and oh my God, what are they doing? They're allowing children to clean up lead residue. You know, so I would go after that and understand that when there's a typical shooting, when you have several dozen rifles in one gym shooting lead pellets, we can expect air levels to contaminate children. And we can expect that those levels exceed the levels of causing blood poisoning through lead. And just 2 micrograms per liter is all it takes for to imperil the life of the unborn. So that's where I'd go. Maybe you could get some of those fundamentalists to understand that guns kill people in more than one way.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's take a look and see. My bandwidth periodically runs low. Let's take a look and see who I have here. Oh, Mara, I am unmuting you right now. It takes a moment. All right, well, let me see. Mara, you should be unmuted.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask a question before, but my phone died, so I'm sorry about that. But this is primarily for Kathy, but if both want to chime in, that's great. I've been talking to people lately about redefining global security in terms of global housing security and other things like that. And I was wondering if you thought that was a useful concept or if it's another extension of globalization and that kind of thing. So, good to hear what you say and check.
It's interesting that, Mara, because I was just myself recalling that anytime I've been in a war zone, and I've been in Iraq during the shock and awe bombing and in an earlier war in 1991. I've been in Gaza during a terrible, terrible bombing campaign, in Lebanon during a war, in Sarajevo, Nicaragua. Every time when a ceasefire is declared, the children want to help their parents rebuild. And you see them, put a tarp on the ground and collect bricks and try to haul the bricks to rebuild a wall, or try to find tumbleweed or wood so their parents can make a fire and be able to cook or be able to purify water. And their eyes are gleaming because they want so much to help their parents after this terrible, terrible trauma of war. And so, of course, with the greatest terror we all face being the terror of what we're doing to our own environment, with climate change and global warming and water resources depleted and contamination of the air and the ground and the water, this is the big terror we face. Of course, redirecting the money that is so obscenely and recklessly and dangerously spent on nuclear weapons and conventional weapons in preparation for war, redirecting that to retrofit housing stock, to use renewable energy, to build high-speed bullet trains for transportation, to assure that infrastructure won't be crumbling even in the United States and certainly beyond. We can do it all. I mean, sometimes I think about Cuba, and there were people living arguably under a dictatorship, But whenever there would be some kind of a terrible disaster, a tsunami, a flood, an earthquake, there were the Cuban doctors and nurses packing up their bags, heading off to be of help. And 2 years later, they're still there. And people loved those Cuban people that came to help, loved them deeply, and celebrated them. Well, imagine if the United States was known not for being a menacing country, or a country to be feared, not a country that would make others cowards, but as a country that would troop off to take care of other people and help rebuild, and then help to build for an actual livable future. Well, that would be our security. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Do you have a question?
Is that I'm at Donna?
Yes, I'm seeing I'm at Donna. Your mic is open and we hear you. So do you have a question or a comment? I think that undoing her mic might have been an accident. All right, I'm going to give one more opportunity for questions and comments. Harriet, do you want to take us out? Your mic's still open.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I should close my mic.
Well, I was giving you an opportunity to be the first to thank our guest and take us out.
Okay.
I'm going to thank our guest. Thank you, Kathy. It was delightful meeting you. Pat, we met earlier. It was very, very delightful meeting you. Thank you both for your incredible insight and passion on both your parts for very, very difficult work that is emotionally draining, and Pat, as you said, can be so incredibly frustrating when you, as you said, are talking about something as simple as safety of children and being unable to find sanity anywhere in a world that really does seem to have totally gone insane.
Yes, I want to thank you all very much. I would like to give a little story that it won't take long. Is that okay?
That's just fine.
I'm also involved in the campaign for Medicare for All and other issues, but I attended a meeting a couple weeks ago. We watched a movie called Fix It about Medicare for All and how good it would be. And they had us do a little exercise, and they asked everybody if they would consent to having their taxes raised to pay for our universal health care. And of course we all raised our hands, and there was one man in the room that raised his, and he said the question really angered him, and they couldn't understand why it would anger him. And he said, because nobody ever asks me if I want my taxes to pay for 53% of our federal budget going to bombs and weapons and 800 military bases around the world. And after I attended that meeting, that had the biggest impact on me, because I began to think of all the good things that could be done in this country if we didn't spend all of our resources on weapons of mass destruction. So if anybody wants to comment on that, they can. And I just wanted to thank you very much.
Thanks, Harriet. Chuck was able to enter his comments and his questions in Q&A. So the first one is for Pat. This is from Chuck. There are over 100,000 public schools in the U.S. JROTC is in only 3,000. It would seem that active shooter video games would have a far greater impact on desensitizing youth to killing. I think Pat's best argument is the lead poisoning. I was on the action board at the American Public Health Association, and that is a real issue. The militarization of our schools I'm not convinced. I'm a former high school teacher and coached high school kids this year. No JROTC program, but some wanted to join the military to get college funding experience and do good. I joined ROTC in junior college to avoid getting drafted into Vietnam. I believe our culture has a far greater impact on our level of empathy and resistance to authority than any ROTC program can overcome. I grew up with guns and was grateful I had them to turn to when my father was beating me, my mom, and my sister. He threatened to kill us, and having access to a gun leveled the power between us. Very powerful and very personal, Chuck.
Yikes.
Yes. Whoa.
Shocking.
I should respond to that.
Yes, Pat.
Well, you mentioned 100,000 schools. I think there are only 24,000 high schools. So, the JROTC programs are near 4,000, so it's slightly higher. But you have to look at this development of a warrior caste. That's what we have. And so it is the Confederacy, and really there aren't hardly any JROTC programs in Connecticut or Rhode Island. They're in North Carolina and Georgia. And so we have this caste that seems to be growing before our very eyes, where militarism is enshrined. It's great value. There's a sacred aspect to serving in the military. And I'm sorry about your family travels. I think all human life is sacred. The last time I checked, and I think we need to pray. We need to be able to just lift our eyes to God, as we define Him, as you might hear in AA, and just say, "Dear Lord, it's just too much for me. Could use your help, with some wisdom, some courage, and some strength, and some compassion." And that works. It works. Pass it on.
Thanks, Pat. And then Kathy, Chuck has 2 comments for you. Kathy, I highly respect your views on providing alternative means to wage peace, but providing opportunity. It appears the 17 Sustainable Development Goals is the best investment we can make. Promoting model UN programs in schools appears to be the best way to counter any militarization of our youth in schools. Kathy, do you want to respond to this one, or do you want to hear the other comment too and respond to them both?
Well, I first want to thank Chuck, your care, your obvious care for other people and your desire for solutions, given that, in your own childhood, there must have been a great deal of fear and frustration, is very, very impressive to me. I believe in the United Nations. I think, it's almost as though there's just not another organization that we can turn to in these very desperate times. I mean, to start from scratch and build another organization would be very, very difficult. And many of the United Nations agencies on the ground are doing very good and very important things. I want to echo what Pat said about the yearning for a better world. And I do worry that actually militarism has become like a new religion here in the United States. And so we should be on guard about that. Pat had used the word sacred, and it's almost as though, even though very few people will themselves be entering into the military and trained to go off to foreign wars or to be in the United States, it nevertheless has a very wide and deepening influence in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And militaries are essentially developed in order to destroy buildings and kill people and use threat and force to enact foreign policies. And that's not, I believe that's not a safe or a secure future for us. So we should make sure that our religious denominations don't become a smokescreen for an actual practice of a salvation through militarism.
Yeah.
And Kathy, here was Chuck's last comment. I highly recommend you read the personal story of Timothy McVeigh. He bombed the Oklahoma City Federal Building because of the injustices he saw in the first Gulf War and in U.S. government invasive gun use at Waco and Ruby Ridge. He didn't use a gun to kill, he used an IED to teach the government a lesson not to abuse its power. He was sorry that children died in the bombing, but he saw them as collateral damage, justified in any war. He was at war against our overly militarized government.
Thank you, Jay. I will certainly look again for more biographical and autobiographical material about Timothy McVeigh. You know, it occurs to me that the people who make the weapons, who profit enormously from the sale of weapons, the people who direct the development and storage and use of weapons, many of those people are looked up to and held in high regard in our society. And I don't want to see anybody go to prison, much less be executed. But I do want to see people rehabilitated. And by that, I mean people who themselves have been commanders in chief of warfare and of killing fields in countries all around the world.
Kathy, thank you so much. Thank you, Pat. I want to thank all the people who joined us tonight. This will appear as a video on People Demanding Action YouTube page. So again, thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
This has been an incredible experience.